I'm doing estimates up to midnight. I'm working on Saturdays. I can't wait till there's another holiday where my phone will die down a little bit just so I can try to spin faster on this hamster wheel and make it go faster. When people don't want to hire, or when people hire and then take on too much work, it's usually because they can't actually communicate what they want to communicate in a way that somebody else can then follow and actually do it the way that it needs to be done, or even better. A lot of contractors, unfortunately, don't charge enough, and therefore there's not enough meat on the bone in order to hire the right people. So they have to hire the bottom of the barrel, which is not the people that are going to help them grow.
It's a chase to the bottom, because if everybody keeps reducing prices, right, then there's going to be no profit left. And trust is probably the most important competitor's advantage that anybody could have in any business, whether you're selling homes or renting apartments or installing floors.
First of all, it's way easier to find the information when it's question-based. And secondly, you end up actually putting down the right information that somebody else can repeat it.
Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Development Land to Legacy. And today's guest knows what it's like to build a business that takes over your life. Liz Chism went from 100-hour weeks running a craft brewery to running it in less than 30 hours a week, all by building systems that actually worked. Now she helps seven-figure contractors do the same, and with her help, they can finally step off the job site and stop being chained to their phones. Liz, I have to ask you, when you were running the brewery, were you at least getting the free beers?
Oh, I definitely get the free beers. Our employees had a limit on how much free beer they could have because we definitely needed to make sure that they were safe. And then all of our brewery staff, so people that weren't in the tasting room, obviously, since they are running with chemicals, dealing with pressure systems, and running forklifts, they were not allowed to drink on the job until after they clocked out. Right. So we definitely had some boundaries around that, but it was a fun experience.
I learned that history a few years ago. We visited Milwaukee and we toured the old Pabst Brewery. And so they were talking about how back in the day, employees were allowed to drink during the workday. And then finally they stopped that. And there was a big revolt. People weren't happy about that change.
Yeah, we had some other things on tap, like non-alcoholic kombucha. So they could have something on tap if they wanted something during the day that wasn't going to prohibit them from working successfully.
Right. Well, that's a good solution. So tell me, Liz, how did you end up from running a brewery to helping contractors?
So it actually is a very full circle. So I actually grew up in the trades. My dad's a third generation contractor, and I had the privilege of being homeschooled my whole life, all the way through high school. And so my dad hated working with employees because they were flaky. And so he hired his kids to be his employees. And so my mom's like, okay, well, if you're going to take the kids and go have them work with you, then they still have to get their schoolwork done by Sunday night. And we all loved working with my dad because we got paid when we worked with my dad. That was the motivation. Get all your schoolwork done by Sunday night and you can work with dad a couple shifts the next week. So starting at about 9 years old, I started helping him. He was a floor covering contractor for a while, and then he switched to being more of a general contractor. And now he's a missionary in Guatemala building schools for the deaf. So he's done the full circle of all types of construction, but I grew up doing that. I've plumbed bathrooms, laid tile, I've dug ditches, I've laid foundations, I've put on roofs and everything in between. And so it is just interesting being so hands-on in the construction world that I took a little detour in the brewery world, and I actually was the head brewer. So a lot of times people think of, a husband and wife team owning the brewery, that the guy does all the brewing. But because of my background in cooking, because of my background in construction, I could run the brewery operationally very successfully and very efficiently. So we would pump out almost double the amount of barrels per year from our tank size than most people would, just because of how tight I ran a schedule. So then once we decided that the brewing world was not where we wanted to live the rest of our life, we shut that down, and contractors just started coming to me and like, okay, how did you scale the brewery and not have it take over your life? How did you go from the 100-hour work weeks to the 120-hour work weeks and start a family and be able to travel? And at one point in time, we actually shipped beer to China. They really liked the styles of beer that we produced. We did a lot of sour beers, which shipped great across seas. We didn't care how long it took to get across that slow boat. When it landed in China, it tasted delicious. still. So all our distributors actually flew us out to China. And my daughter came with us, who's 14 months old, and went to China with us. In China, Google doesn't work. So having a Gmail account, like you can't check your email, you can't text, you can't call, you can't literally have no communication with your employees. We had that goal of making sure our business was fully systemized before we left. So that way we could take 2 weeks off with zero communication and have our business actually still thrive when we came back. That was kind of that pivotal moment where we actually did do it and our business did grow while we were gone. And so that was kind of one of the reasons why contractors came to me. I was like, okay, if you could do it in the brewery and you grew up in construction, can you help me out? Because I'm drowning. I'm working 70 to 80 hours a week. And there's no way that I could turn my phone off for even 2 days. My phone rings all the time. I'm doing estimates up to midnight. I'm working on Saturdays. I can't wait till there's another holiday where my phone will die down a little bit just so I can try to spin faster on this hamster wheel and make it go faster. And so that's how I transitioned out of the brewery and into coaching contractors.
That makes perfect sense. So contractors came to you. It's not like you started the business specifically to help the contracting industry, right?
Correct. At the time when I finished the brewery, I actually was just attracting a lot of different types of clients just because we had the brewery and we had so many connections all over the US in various things, because we did distribute now that I worked with autism companies. I worked with an oil and gas company in Texas. I worked with a coffee roasting company, worked with contractors. So I worked with a lot of different types of companies. But at the end of the day, because of my background in construction, I ended up always gravitating towards those businesses. And I ended up being able to help them even more because I already had that background knowledge. With any type of coaching, they always tell you, what do you need to stop doing in order to scale? I know Steve Jobs is a big one in saying no to so many things. When he came in as CEO, there was gazillion products and he was like, nope, we're cutting them all down. We're simplifying it and we're focusing in on that. And so that's kind of how I shifted to just the contractors. And then now I only advertise to contractors who also do a lot of development. They do a lot of custom homes. They work closely with real estate agents because that's the connection is within that conversation.
Right. That's amazing. So I talk to a lot of owners. I talk to a lot of developers. I talk to a lot of contractors. Obviously, construction is one of the most expensive components of real estate development. But I talk to many owners. I typically divide them into two camps. One that thinks that real estate development is so complicated they would never want to touch it. And then the other thinks that it's so easy, they can hire an architect, they can hire a contractor. And some even think, how hard can it be? I can just go and hire my own subs and get it done and capture all that margin. In fact, one developer recently told me, and he's not an inexperienced professional, he's an engineer, he's done a lot of work in the industry, but he was working on one of his first development projects and he said, I'm just going to GC it myself. To my question, have you done it before? No, but I've worked with contractors so many times I can figure it out. I ran a construction company for many years and I finally shut it down because I did exactly what you were describing. I had no free time. I guess my question is, after having analyzed many business practices, after having helped many clients, and after having done optimization and put in insists in place for your own business, what would you say are number one, or maybe the top 3 reasons why contractors are so overworked and why is it so stressful and so busy for them?
So one of the biggest reasons that happened, typically a really good quality contractor has how they do it all in their head. And then when they try to delegate, it doesn't actually work out. And so because they have such a high reputation, because they have high standards, which is necessary, and that's how they've grown because of that reputation, then they have to pull all that work back on them. And so what happens is they expand and then they try to delegate and then that work gets piled on top of them. And then they go, okay, well, the new standard is now 60 hours a week. So then they expand even more and then they have to pull back. So then they work 80 hours a week. And then it just becomes this varying effect where they really can't figure out how to unbury themselves to even scale without chaos. And so one of the things that I always have people do is create clarity in the process. And once you do, you can delegate. So they've done tons of different studies on how much people can understand or how delegation works. And there's a particular study done by a professor at Stanford, and she called it the Rocky Road. And basically, she had a bunch of students. She split the class in half. So she had 2 sets of students. And one of them knew all of these songs they were popular songs. They could, they were always heard on the radio. And then the other group had to guess what the song was based off of just tapping. So if I were to tap Jingle Bells, you'd go, oh, that's Jingle Bells, because you know that song so well. So she picked songs that were like that, where everybody knew that song and you'd have to tap it out. And her hypothesis was that, 40-50% of the people would be able to guess these songs because they're so well known. Everybody should know them. And come to find out, only 2 to 3% could actually guess the song. And basically, the way that translates to business is that when we tell our employees to do something, when we hire somebody, when we hire a project manager, a superintendent, a foreman, a sub, whatever it is that we're hiring to try to delegate so we can scale, we end up assuming that the accompaniments in our head and the song that we're playing in our head is what they hear, except the only thing we're doing is tapping. And so what happens is we think that they're getting almost all of our information that we want, and really they're only getting 2 to 3%. Other studies say that when you communicate to somebody without something written, so no SOP, and without something tangible that they could repeat and listen to over again, and without training, that people only actually grasp about 10%. So if you think about it, when you delegate, you're delegating 10% at best, 2 to 3% at worst. And that's where a lot of the failures in projects come about and in jobs come about. And so my big goal with all of the contractors that I work with is to get all the accompaniments in their head down on a piece of paper so everybody can listen to the same music, and then the business runs seamlessly. So most of the time people want to go to like ChatGPT and go, hey, write me an SOP for fill in the blank, whatever SOP it is. And yeah, that can kind of work, but it's not going to really take your specialty and your expertise and your reputation out of your head and get it to be able to communicate. When people don't want to hire, or when people hire and then take on too much work, it's usually because they can't actually communicate what they want to communicate in a way that somebody else can then follow and actually do it the way that it needs to be done, or even better.
Right. So I guess I could almost correlate that to the planning process of developing a building, a house, an office building, an apartment building, whatever it is. Before you can start construction, you have to put together all of these elements, right? You have to design the building, you have to engineer the building, you have to detail every single element of that building, you have to specify all the materials from doorknobs to electrical switchgear to pavers on a roof, right? So every little thing has to be thought through. And whenever it's not thought through in very fine detail, you start seeing problems in a construction site and you start seeing delays, because now you start solving problems in real time. So it's almost the same as to what you're describing. When you grow fast, for example, or just kind of organically grow your business without thinking through every step of the way, you start solving problems in real time, and that's when it snowballs.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah. So in your experience coaching your clients, or maybe your own personal experience, can you give an example of the best turnaround of what specifically you saw and how you solved the problem?
So there's quite a few examples. One guy in particular, he came to me just under 7 figures, which usually my cutoff is about 7 figures, but I could see he was growth minded. I was like, you're right on the cusp, so you can come join my program. And some of the things that he had to overcome at first was understanding his numbers and making sure he's charging enough. A lot of contractors, unfortunately, don't charge enough, and therefore there's not enough meat on the bone in order to hire the right people. So they have to hire the bottom of the barrel, which is not the people that are going to help them grow. It's the people that need to be micromanaged. So understanding your numbers is huge. And I personally like to understand them on a percentage basis versus a hard number basis, because it's really like a pie. And it's like, how much of this expense is part of the pie? Our pie could be different sizes, but that percentage is really important. And most people don't look at their numbers and percentages. For example, if your job is, I work with a lot of bathroom and kitchen remodelers. I also work with developers and stuff. But for a kitchen remodel, all of your cost of goods sold should only take up 50% of your overall revenue. And then the other 25% should be for overhead. And the other 25% roughly should be for profit. And so when you estimate a job and only take home 25%, but that 25%'s got to cover your salary and taxes and insurance and all the other things, then you just don't have even enough to pay for somebody else. And so I always have them pay for the person before they hire them. So if they need to hire a project manager within the next 90 days, this project that they're estimating right now, they put in a line item for a project manager and a salary. And then that money goes into a bank account for a project manager. And so that way they're paying a project manager before they get one. And so that way there is enough meat on the bones. So pricing and profit and actually making sure that your profit is going to be there at the end of the day. One of the things that also goes into that is estimate accuracy. So I just got off a phone with a brand new client and he's wearing all the hats, doing all the things and completely out of time. And he's at about 25% gross profit margin, but his estimates are only 85% accurate. What if we could actually take that 15% and put it on the 25? Now you have a 40% profit on every job. What do you think about that? And so when you start looking at your numbers and actually knowing the numbers, again, in percentages, you can start seeing where the holes are in your business. The second thing that I have them do is find the leverage points. So it's great to go do these small one-off jobs that are $5,000, $10,000, but they end up taking up so much of your time and bandwidth because the biggest time constraint within a business, within a project, is the startup and the closeout. And so those two bookend sections of time take the most amount of process, the most amount of oversight, and the most amount of details. The work in the middle just happens. If you start framing a house, as soon as you have the plans and you have the crew on site and you have the lumber, the framing happens. You don't need to micromanage it. You don't need to, it just happens. Not having the clarity within the startup and the closeout being super clear. And then on smaller jobs, those go almost neck and neck. And so there's really no time in the middle to take that breather and get other jobs. The longer the jobs are, the bigger the projects are. That's where those bookends can actually be spaced out. You can get that breather, make sure your cash flow is good, and make sure that you're hiring people and you have the time to train them. So that way you start strong and then you finish strong on every single job.
I have a million questions in related to what you just said. So these percentages, how do you know what the benchmark is? Is it just from experience, or is there sort of a well-documented range of these ratios? The profit margin should be X, the overhead margin should be Y, and the cost of goods sold can exceed a certain amount. How do you know what the right balance is?
So in general, across the board, you want 20% net profit minimum. For a really well-run business, 25%, somebody's going to be knocking on your door trying to buy your business. 15% is a good, comfortable business, but 20 is where people like to shoot for. With that being said, the average for contracting companies is 6%. So if you can do better than 6%, then you're doing better than the average. At the end of the day, it all washes out to making sure you actually have money to grow. I personally like to shoot for 20%, take 5% off and keep it in my bank account for working capital. And then the other 15% using like the profit first model where you just put it in a separate bank account and then it's gone. You never see it. I like automatic transfers for that. So you get a job and you get a paycheck and 15% of that just goes to another bank account. And so all of a sudden you're actually working with less capital, but you're forcing yourself to be more efficient. Because if you see the money in your bank account, you typically spend it. It's the Parkinson's principle. Whatever available resources you have, you end up using all of those resources. Time swells to the available time that you give it. Your expenses swell to how much you make. People who made 6 figures last year and now they got a raise are spending the same amount, they're spending their entire paycheck, even though they've gotten a raise. It's just natural. They call it the Parkinson's law because it's across the board. And so that's why I like to skim off the top, say, okay, profits away and not paying the owner from profit. And that's where a lot of people get wrong. They're like, cool, I have all this left over. Now I'm going to go pay myself because I can pay myself. Your payment is actually part of the operating expenses. And I do push that into a separate line item. So that way I have a whole contractor's dashboard that I use. And so every month my contractors fill it out and we can look at the pattern. And that really is the key to any business, is pattern recognition. My business compared to your business are going to look like two completely different things. But at the end of the day, if I can see January, February, March, and the whole year, I can start telling, oh, I can see what's happening. For example, let's say I spend $5,000 on marketing and then I up that to $10,000. Well, I could think like, wow, I increased my marketing by, 100%. I increased it by $5,000. But what if my revenue went up 200%? Now that the percentage of marketing costs to revenue is now a lot smaller. So I can go, oh, this lever, I did this marketing, and the percentage actually went down, even though the cost went up. And so that's where looking at percentages over looking at hard numbers is a better way to see. And you can start seeing trends and go, wow, I've been spending more on marketing and my revenue's staying flatlined. So what marketing do I need to stop doing in order to make my marketing percentage go down? And what do I need to shift to do something different? Because that's obviously not working.
Right. I'm a strong believer that most companies don't spend enough on marketing, especially in construction. Most builders grew up because their dad was a builder and that's how they ended up in construction. That's all they know. They know how to build. They don't know how to sell. The reason, in my opinion, the margins are so squeezed and so small is because everybody's afraid to raise their prices. I think it's true across many industries. Whether you're in development or selling widgets, you're trying to keep your price low because you think that's how you have to compete with others on price. It's a chase to the bottom because if everybody keeps reducing prices, right, then there's going to be no profit left.
Except right now, we are in what I call, and what I've heard other people call it, a trust recession. And so right now, it's really not about the race to the bottom. It's really about how much trust can you develop with your potential client. And then the pricing doesn't matter at that point.
That's very true. And you and I agree on that same point. That's exactly what I was trying to get to, is that the profit margin has to stay there and you have to figure out how to compete. And the only way to compete is not on price, but on all of these other things. And trust is probably the most important competitor's advantage that anybody could have in any business, whether you're selling homes or renting apartments or installing floors.
100%. Yeah. So I actually teach my guys how to build trust using social media and the type of content that needs to go out there. So a lot of times people just put ads out in social media and it's like, hey, I'm a contractor that can do XYZ work, hire me. And that doesn't build trust. And so there's a way to kind of go in the back door and build trust and build an audience. So that way, when you do market to them, you can have that trust already in place. For instance, today I'm in the middle of a project for all of my clients. And so one of the things that I wanted to do is have family members write a letter to my clients. And one of the family members was the son, and he works in the business, in this landscaping business. He's talking to me on the phone. He's like, okay, what kind of letter do you want? Like, what do you want it to say? He wanted a little bit more information. So we were chatting for a few minutes today. And he was like, I just want to tell you that the change that I've seen in my dad with working with you has been insane. And he's like, it's all these little things. Like, it's not this one big thing that happened. It's all these little things. But he's like, ever since we started marketing with trust, when I show up to a client's house, we have a different conversation. It's not me being compared to the next contractor. We're like best friends. We're on a playing field that's entirely different. He's like, I've been able to close faster. I've been able to build relationships with people. I've been able to get better referrals, all because of putting in trust marketing. And most of the marketing doesn't even say where to call. It just is providing that value and building that trust and really like giving them a behind the scenes of what it's like to be in that company and where the quality is and what do they mean by quality and all of these different questions that people have. Marcus Sheridan wrote a book called They Ask You Answer. So it kind of goes along that line of what are people wanting to know? And when they know that, all of a sudden they are more familiar with your process and that trust can be built. And this is across any industry. And there's just so many fake people out there, especially with AI. I mean, you can clone your voice. You can have it say eloquently whatever you want it to say. And people are stealing other people's way of saying things. And it's like, okay, well, who do I trust right now? And so that's why video marketing is really important, because you can't change who I am on video when it's, there's imperfections. Like you can tell when it's AI and when it's like a real person. So building that trust is actually what's going to help people be able to charge more and get the jobs that are going to be the best jobs for their goals.
Right. I mean, it's even the same for scripted versus unscripted. Even if you write your own script and then read it, it's not going to sound the same unless you're a professional actor. There are a few people who can act really well and read the script like you'd never tell. But majority of us, when we read, it's obvious that we read.
Yeah,
and
there's the bug eye.
Exactly. So Tell me about another thing you mentioned early on is about building these systems, writing these SOPs. And the challenge that I've experienced in our company a few years ago, we create SOPs for everything. And it took us, I don't know, probably at least 18 months to roll them out. I don't think we ever finished that process just because everybody got burned out by writing the SOP. And the way we thought we would do it is we would have each department create SOPs for their things that usually take the most amount of time, that are most convoluted. It started with accounting because, as you know, in construction, accounting is always a mess, and accountant is usually angry, and superintendents never want to follow the rules. They just dump a stack of invoices on accountant's desk and leave. And so we started writing these SOP, and after a while, we thought that they were perfect, and the accountant signed off, and even the project managers agreed with that. The accountant knew what the principles are, but nobody, because they ended up being like, I mean, for a simple procedure would be maybe 4 pages with like illustrations and explanations, and superintendent would never read even past the 3rd line.
Yep.
How do you deal with it?
So there's 2 things. The first one is I do question-based SOP. And then the second one is I have all my SOPs using Google Docs. I have tried all the other programs. It is not worth it. I just stick to Google Docs, and I do something called Google Doc collaboration. So typically what happens is people will create an SOP from whatever they can think of the process is, and they write it down, and then somebody scans it and goes, yep, that looks pretty good. And then that SOP never gets looked at again. So instead, I actually like to ask questions. So for instance, if it's about accounting, it's how do you process checks? How do you process payroll? What day of the week do you do it in? What programs do you use? Like every question. And then you have the statement underneath that. First of all, it's way easier to find the information when it's question-based. And secondly, you end up actually putting down the right information that somebody else can repeat it. So a lot of times if I say, hey, counting, like, okay, I open up QuickBooks and this is how I pay my vendors, that's great. But there's nothing that triggers the process, and there's no end result. Like, what is supposed to happen? Like, what are you supposed to do? Like, every invoice should be done in less than 30 days because we're net 30 or net 15 or whatever. Like, there's always details that are missing when people just brain dump onto an SOP. And there's so many assumptions made, especially by people who do the process all the time, every single day. And so that's why I switched to questions instead of just here's an SOP on how to do it. It's like, what are the questions? Okay, so what triggers this? Well, the invoices happen. Well, who's responsible for the invoices? Oh, well, what's the process for the superintendent to do it? And so you start actually creating the clarity within that SOP. And then by having it all in Google Docs, you're sharing that, and then you add comments. One of the things that I do for my clients is they'll send me an SOP of them answering the questions, and then I send them back comments on the side saying, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? And so that's where I'm really like pulling all the rest of the information out of their head. But then it becomes a collaborative effort versus a chore. And then the third thing that I do, once that's all done, and it's really the crux of implementing it, is, for instance, this works really well if you as the owner are really good at something and you're trying to delegate to your crew that's on the job site and they're not getting, you create the SOP of like, this is how I want everything to be done. This is the SOP for XYZ process. And then you hand it to your crew. And instead of saying, follow it, or here's our new SOP, which does not work, you say, find 10 things wrong with this. By asking them to now critically look at the SOP, you end up putting them on your team and the SOP as the thing that you're working on. And so therefore there's that team. They'll rip it apart. And that's where you start going, oh, so even though I want things done this way, you're doing them this way on the job site, and you had maybe your good reasons to do it. Now we need to understand, well, what really does need to happen on the job site for this particular process or for this particular thing. And so when you have people not have this dictatorship of, well, there's the SOPs, go follow them, or else kind of military-esque type way of doing things and way of running your business, when you have more of that transformational leadership where you say, hey, can you look this over and tell me 10 things that are wrong with this? They'll rip it apart. And that's when you're actually going to create that collaboration. And then if there's any other updates that need to happen, most people update through an email or a text message. Hey, this isn't working very well. Can you do this? And that is not where updates go. You go back to the document and you make a comment and you go at, and then you say whatever person's name is. And then you say, hey, I know that we're doing this, but I'm noticing that this is actually not working out very well. We need to come up with a new process. And so then everything is within that document, and it's a live, breathing, working document. And so that way, when you hire somebody else in, they can see all the comments on the side. They can see all the notes. They can see the whole process, and everything is there. So instead of this polished piece of paper, which the document is, there's that side conversation that catches them up to speed way faster, which is how you can hire and train and onboard people way faster in your business.
Excellent. So shifting gears a little bit, Liz, if you could hand a contractor or developer just one tool, not like a hammer, not a power tool, but like a mindset or a system that would completely change their business forever, what would that be?
So for a tool, I would say AI, and I would preface that with, I use Wave AI a lot. So I record conversations with my guys record conversations with clients. They record conversations with their project manager. So that way you don't need to have a note taker there. You're just recording the entire conversation and then plugging that into AI and saying, hey, pull out this information. Like, what materials do I need on this job based on this conversation? And so really utilizing AI into that. The other thing is that one of the big things that I tell contractors is that if they want to be a $10 million business, they need to act like a $10 million business. So letting a $5,000 change order slip by because, they're a nice client, I always go, okay, well, would a $10 million contractor do that? They're like, well, no, they wouldn't. I'm like, so why are you doing that? And they're like, oh, that's right. And so you always have to think and act bigger than you are. If you want to have, 100 homes in an area, well, then you need to think about, okay, what would somebody who has 100 homes do that I'm not doing right now? And so when you think about that in the future, you can start dictating your actions now and really think about that. Pricing. Would a $10 million contractor price their jobs to barely make them income? No, they would price for profit. Okay, well then price for profit. And so if your goals don't match up with your actions, then you're never going to make it to your goals.
What's the very first step they should take tomorrow morning to move toward freedom?
I would do a project audit and a time audit. Those are the first two things that you got to do. You got to see where your time is going, and you got to see what projects you're taking on that you shouldn't take on. I follow a 5S framework for all of my contractors, and the first step is simplify. You've got to cut things out, because I even tell people, like, you can't do my program unless you're going to cut something, because I'm not going to have you work 70 hours and then start my program and now you're working 75 hours. I know you're not going to do it, so don't even start. And they're like, no, okay, I'll start cutting then, because I really do want to not work 70 hours a week. And so the project audit is really understanding what jobs are profitable and what jobs aren't. I have a landscape guy, and he was doing pools, and his pools were 10% gross profit margins. And as soon as he saw the numbers and did a project audit, he was like, oh, I am not doing pools anymore. And he subs them all out to another pool guy that actually specializes in pools and does them all the time. And so really understanding where are those levers and where can I free up my time to actually move forward, because you've got to cut before you scale.
Makes perfect sense. And I would even add to that every owner, those owners who want to develop, those owners who own a business, I would say figure out what you're good at and do that, and then try to outsource everything else. So if you're a busy professional, doctor or lawyer or a software developer, and then you decide to develop and build your land, is this really the best use of your time? Or can you work with other professionals that can do that better and free up your time doing what you're best at? And that can trickle down every layer of any business.
100%. One of the best assessments that I use is called the Working Genius Assessment. It's by Patrick Lencioni. He's written a ton of business books that have been very popular. And he has a book called The 6 Types of Working Genius. And most of the contractors, actually all the contractors I work with, they are the visionary. They're the ideas person. And their frustrations are in the getting it done and being the workhorse and crossing the finish line. And so when they take that assessment and they start saying, oh, I actually need to stay in the visionary standpoint and delegate the workhorse and the cross the finish line and even the management side of things, that's when it really helps them understand why they're the bottleneck, because I'll have their whole team take it. So this is where your strengths are. This is where your genius is. And, this is where your weaknesses are. Now we can work together. And if we can shift even a couple percentage more into our genius, our superpower, the things that we're really good at, the things that excite us, we can do a better job in those areas because they don't take, they say, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's really the idea of working in your zone of genius versus constantly being in your frustrations and understanding who do I need to hire for my frustrations so that I can stay in my zone of genius.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I'm always thinking there's another type of contractors or construction workers that are really good craftsmen, like really good carpenters, and they're just a horrible business person or business owner or just a horrible manager. To them, I usually say, look, if you want to run your construction business, but all you really enjoy is carpentry, just be the carpenter. Hire a business manager to run your business, but do your trade. Maybe teach others to do things exactly the way you do it, to promote that quality, to promote that work ethics or whatever it is that makes your work product different. But don't try to run a business if that's not your thing. Have somebody else do that. It's unfortunately a common path for companies to promote skilled tradesmen to management positions. And sometimes they could be trained and sometimes they cannot.
Exactly.
Liz, thank you very much for that super insightful conversation. I think your advice is invaluable. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
So I'm very active on Instagram and Facebook. So come find me. My Instagram handle is Liz Chism. And you can see all the videos of me teaching contractors various things about construction and how to manage people and how to manage their teams and their businesses so that they can grow and scale them.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes. And of course, anybody who enjoyed this conversation, please make a comment below, subscribe, and share with your friends so that they could learn more about how to scale their construction business and how to develop real estate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Real estate development. Real estate development. Land to legacy.